What do people not realize has an extremely low chance of happening? Story 1: being killed by a serial killer. I was a sociology major in college, and in my deviant behavior class, this is what my teacher said at the beginning of a lesson about serial killers: none of you will be killed by a serial killer. I'm telling you as a statistician that the likelihood of it is nil. Even the most prolific of serial killers' victims make up a fraction of a percent of people who die from murder. Sadly, you are much more likely to be killed by someone you know. Same goes for assault and trafficking. It's actually very unlikely to be a stranger. Story 2: random child abductions are extremely rare. Most of the time, it's one of the parents. Of course, you should teach your kids stranger danger. But the way some parents behave, they think there's kidnappers hiding behind every bush. Story 3: surviving after CPR. It's roughly 7 to 10 if you're outside the hospital, and even less when you're a senior citizen. It's also very brutal, as many people aren't prepared to see 200-pound men putting their body weight onto grandpa and grandma's chest, breaking all their ribs, instead of just letting them pass peacefully. Story 4: being thrown from a car during an accident and coming out unharmed. I know people to this day that don't wear seatbelts because they think it's safer to be thrown out. Story 5: actually coming out ahead in gambling, if you do it often enough. Of course, anyone with a decent brain knows that typical gambling is negative value every time. But if you do it often enough, it's even less likely that you'll come out ahead, as the number of events being looked at approaches infinity. The outcome will approach the mean, which is negative value. That's one reason why if you put on a cheeky bet and end up winning, just quit while you're ahead. Or don't bet in the first place. It's fine if you can consider it an entertainment expense. But all too many people try to use that as a justification, when the truth is that they're really hoping to buck the odds, and the maths doesn't care about how much you wish it would bend to you. Story 6: child abduction or assault by strangers. Statistically speaking, family members and friends of family make up for 80% of all reported child assault cases. Story 7: growing up, I was sure that grown-ups were constantly on fire, sinking in quicksand, and offering free drugs to every kid they see sticking if in random pieces of candy. Story 8: making a living from YouTube or playing video games. Edit: I agree with a lot of us, saying it requires an uncontrollable amount of luck, despite the quality of content. I'm a teacher, and it kills me to hear how popular this idea has become lately. More so, how unfair and fickle it all seems to me at times. I see small YouTubers pour their heart and soul into their content, like literally building an entire drift car project, but barely manage to build an audience. Other times I see what I believe are just e-beggars making millions from mediocre content, playing games poorly, or worse, people who simply steal content and do voiceovers. Man, must be nice to make millions stealing internet videos and doing some obvious voiceover narration, but that's a whole different subject. Story 9: I've seen so many good points here about true crime, and I'm just going to summarize. The majority of human trafficking victims are trafficked by their family members. No one is placing sunglasses or zip ties on your car. To traffic you, your car has a license plate. And also the number of abductions at gyms or Target or elsewhere is incredibly low. The majority of murder and rape victims know their murder rapist. It's incredibly unlikely that you will be the victim of a serial killer or serial rapist. That you don't know, almost all serial rapists are known by their victims. Story 10: the person most likely to kill you is yourself. More people die from suicide than from wars, natural disasters combined. Story 11: if you drive to the airport to catch a flight, congratulations, you won. The odds of you dying have significantly and infinitesimally reduced. You have better odds at the lottery than you do dying on that plane, compared to the rolling death trap that is a car. Story 12: becoming millionaires affected by the tax raises they vote against. Edit: there might be a problem with semantics in my original comment, but you guys need to stop assuming everyone is American. Story 13: contracting a brain-eating amoeba from swimming. It happens, but only on average three cases per year in the entire world. But to my kid on the spectrum, anytime he goes near water, it's going to happen to him. Poor guy, we are working on it. Story 14: prion disease, or CJD. You don't need to eat contaminated meat or otherwise be exposed. We all have about a 1 in a million chance of spontaneously developing one. Story 15: finding your soulmate. Imagine every person is a puzzle piece. There are 8 billion pieces. Do you think the 3 to 4 pieces you fit in perfectly with are going to be in your immediate area? Find one that's close and make it work. There are plenty of remarkable pieces that fit pretty well, even if they're not the one, and you might even make a neat picture in your tiny part PF the world. Story 16: people handing out marijuana edibles to kids on Halloween. Literally, no one does that. No one would be careless enough to do that. That is expensive, and people want to get high off them. Story 17, any one of the natural disasters big enough to create any real extinction event, super random, rare, and not likely in your life by the current projections. Story 18, men are statistically more likely to be raped than falsely accused of rape. Assault is criminally underreported, and men make up a large portion of victims who don't report their attack. The threat of false accusations ruining a man's life is so low that we're going to be able to survive unchanged after AI progresses a little further, and the average person will not be able to determine fake video from real video. Worried about bots on Twitter or Reddit now. Just wait. Story 19, being killed or abducted at random. For example, being killed in a mass shooting, even in the places where they're most common, is so unlikely that, rationally, you should disregard it completely. Child molestation deserves special mention here. Because of how much attention it gets, the perpetrator is overwhelmingly likely to be a relative or other person trusted by the family, not a pasty creep in the bushes waiting for you to look away from your kid at the park for a second. Stranger danger is barely a thing in that arena. Story 20, becoming a millionaire when neither of your parents are already. Edited to add, when the term really started catching on in the use, that amount of money would be the equivalent of $35 to $40 million today. Even in 1972, when I first heard the term, it would have been $6 or $8 million in today's money. It's the Horatio Algiers fantasy I'm referencing, not the tricks you could play with Confederate money or Venezuelan currency, but you guys knew that already. Story 21, people on Reddit won't like it, but getting unjustly negligently killed by a cop. There are about 1,000 police-related deaths a year, and the vast majority, over 95 of those, are situations where lethal force was justified or unavoidable. Compare that to 6,000 homicides a year from other citizens who are your neighbors, friends, and family. So no, being scared that police will kill you is not a reasonable response to seeing one. Worry about cancer or heart disease instead. Story 22, being buried alive. I can't believe how many smart people I know that think this can actually happen. I always ask them how they plan to survive being embalmed first, and they give me a blank stare. Story 23, being attacked by a trans woman in the bathroom. The chances are so low, essentially doesn't happen. Trans women are much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Story 24, being murdered or violent crime happening to you in general. If you're not in deathly fear of heart disease, cancer, or organ failure at least 1,000 times more vigorous than your fear of murder is, you're objectively wrong. Same thing if you're less afraid of cars than planes or trains or ships. Story 25, being a victim of a school shooting or any mass shooting close to zero. For the average American, far more likely to drown. Story 26, I guess a lot of young dudes will hate me for that, but I'm truly sure that nowadays it is a chance of becoming a famous rapper starting from zero. It's possible if you already have money and professional production behind you, but it's impossible to become a star from your parents' bedroom, sorry. Story 27, a lot of people here are falling for the logical fallacy of small probabilities. Since the probability of X is so small, it's an invalid fear. But while the probability of you dying today, for example, is small, according to some sources, 166, 859 people still die every day, the probability of you dying today is modulated, in part by your choices and behaviors, and the probability that you will die eventually is 100. A lot of things affect only a small percentage of the population, but their absolute numbers are still high enough to be significant issues. COVID is a good example of this. Most people did not become seriously ill or die of COVID even before the vaccination, but COVID was still a public health nightmare due to strained community resources and took an unprecedented number of lives. Story 28, being awake under anesthesia. People worry about it often thanks to Hollywood or a story someone told them. The reality is that true awareness under anesthesia is close to 1 in a million, and most anesthesiologists will never see it in their entire career. Real awareness under anesthesia means that you are paralyzed as the surgeon is actively working. It is traumatic and associated with PTSD. People often say that they were awake under anesthesia, but this is usually due to a few things. Poor communication by the anesthesiologist. The patient thought they would be asleep, but they will only get sedation. They remember things prior to surgery, like being in the room, seeing the equipment, and/or having a mask on their face. This is fairly normal. Lastly, sometimes patients say they woke up early. Some practices wake people up in the recovery area, but it's also common for patients to be woken up in the room. Sometimes this occurs as a dressing is being applied. Again, this is normal. It is really rare to have true awareness under general anesthesia. Good communication preoperatively helps patients to know what to expect during the surgery. Story 29, winning the lottery. People often dream about it, but the odds are astronomically low. You're more likely to get struck by lightning or become a movie star. Story 30, making money at an MLM or pyramid scheme. 95 of the people entering those things will lose money, and they know it. The only thing is that promoters convince them that they will be part of the 5 they want. Story 31, gun owners overestimate the chance that they'll use the gun for self-defense and underestimate the chance that the gun will be used to kill its owner. Story 32, I feel like a number of things mentioned here as low risk, low probability are actually high risk, and only low probability exactly, because we're so afraid of them that we take every precaution, like child kidnapping by a stranger, or even shark attack, to some degree. Truly only few risks are not minimally affected by our behavior. Plane crash being one. Everything else, you have to consider the fear-risk feedback loop before you start acting like it can't happen to you. Story 33, attitudes about this are finally changing, but until very recently people honestly believed nuclear power was dangerous, despite the facts showing very plainly that it's the safest energy source. Story 34, becoming a millionaire. I've watched so many working-class people support politicians who only support uber-rich because they think that will be them someday, and by voting for them, they make themselves even less likely to get rich. Story 35, mass shootings. While they have increased in frequency, the majority are related to gang activity, e.g., rival gang shoots up a drug corner or a confrontation at a club or party. School shootings in particular are so statistically rare. There are hundreds of more likely dangers to children, including potentially fatal dangers, such as crossing the street unsafely, not being properly fastened in an age-appropriate seat, choking hazards, drowning, etc. School shootings get a ton of attention because they are so egregiously awful, but don't let them distract you from the importance of day-to-day safety measures. Learn CPR, learn first aid, educate yourself on property car seats, teach your children how to protect themselves. Story 36, aliens existing within our realm of existence. We're never going to see them. They're never going to see us. There will be no method of travel that will bring us together. While they may exist, the idea of us interacting with them is pure science fiction. Story 37, Project 2025. Conservatives don't want it either. Even if it passed, conservatives, the ones that have been hoarding guns for 100 years, would without any doubt start a civil war with the government, and they would happily fight alongside liberals for the cause. The reason conservatives don't care is because they don't believe it will happen. Conservatives view Project 2025 as nothing more than a source of fear-mongering for the left, and are certain it would never pass. Republicans watch too. Edit, if you're going to downvote me, you could at least explain why you disagree. Story 38, trafficking, at least among the people most worried about it. This is much riskier for people on the edges of society, your runaway teens, abused children, people that are in an underclass, or in a country illegally, etc. No one is scanning tourist locations for 30-year-old UK and American white women whose absence will be noticed, pictures spread up, and such a trafficking victim sticking out like a sore thumb. People were warning me about traveling in Thailand, where trafficking is a definite problem, but again, not among my racial, socioeconomic, and national profile solo, since I might get trafficked, rather than warning me about renting a motor scooter, which is a massive cause of tourist injury and death in Thailand. I did it anyway. But still, even people abroad think like that, terrified that the events of Hostel will come true, but will get drunk, pop their girlfriend on the back of a scooter with neither wearing a helmet, and take off. If you're in the developed world getting rabies, people love to talk about how horrifying rabies is, and as soon as you have symptoms, it's too late. But we have eradicated it to the point of rabies being an incredibly rare disease. There are only 1 to 3 cases of people getting rabies in the U.S. per year. You have a higher chance of winning over 100 million in the lottery. Story 39, illegal immigrants voting in enough numbers to actually affect an election, or at all really, despite decades of fear-mongering, it just doesn't happen. Story 40, nuclear reactor failure. Nuclear reactors are built to run themselves essentially, and there are tons of redundancies and safety features built into the systems. Unfortunately, a few huge disasters were all it took to give nuclear energy a bad name. Nuclear really is the future, and it is insanely safe. Story 41, when galaxies collide out in the universe, there's almost a 0 chance that any stars in each of the respective galaxies would hit each other. What is crazy is that the average amount of stars in any galaxy is 100 billion. There's just so much space between stars that the odds are almost 0 in a galactic collision. Story 42, coming out ahead of the stock market in day trading or active trading. Anyone who says they can beat the market is lying to you. Long term, of course. Story 43, stranger abduction, and it's pretty dang bigoted. There's this culture of Instagram Facebook moms who feed off each other spreading fake stories about how they or their precious Bradlin were almost abducted. They feel the need to make up this nonsense because it makes them feel special and superior. Like somehow they're so precious and desirable that every man they see, and especially minorities, are out to kidnap and rape them. This almost never happens. Stranger abductions are exceedingly rare. The most common child abuse and abductions are from family members. You and your child are not that special, and no one wants to kidnap you. Story 44, kidnapping. Nowadays, many parents and even society as a whole destroy many childhoods out of fear for something that, in most regions of the world, has a vanishing chance of happening. Story 45, anyone giving a single flying about hacking you or your data, unless you are a well-known troublemaker from an autocracy with serious resources, your medical data and old Facebook pictures is of no consequence to anybody. Relax, and certainly don't halt the many benefits things like centralized records provide. Story 46, someone I know has been hit by a car, not once but twice. That in itself is quite rare, giving both times it was the driver's fault and not hers. But what makes the whole thing even rarer is that one of those times she broke her neck. And guess what? She's not even paralyzed or anything like that. Can't tell if she's a lucky person for being completely fine or an unlucky one for being hit by a car twice. Story 47, democracy, ending when the Republicans win the next election. It is not on the ballot. There is no threat to it. The only people threatening democracy are the Democrats. Story 48, civil war. At least in America, WWII, fallout in real life. Especially with the newer nukes being incapable of leaving a radioactive wasteland. Just vaporizes stuff. Then you can come out safely as long as no more nukes drop. But those nukes still exist, so someone is going to get fallout if it does happen. But it most likely won't stop spreading fear, folks. Story 49, being killed in a random home invasion. Such events are extremely rare, for the obvious reason that robbers generally just want to steal stuff, not get into a violent confrontation with homeowners. They prefer to break into your house when you're not there. A lot of NRA propaganda revolves around the idea that this sort of thing happens all the time, so you're almost insane if you don't arm yourself against it. Story 50, finding intelligent life in our own galaxy, let alone the universe. The famous Drake equation, first propounded in 1961, put the odds much in favor, but that was based on the knowledge of the time. Since then, it has become clear that the conditions on Earth that were influential in the creation of life and its evolution, the early collision with Theta that created just one moon of a certain size, plate tectonics, a protected position in a star system behind several other planets, and not one, but two asteroid belt clouds that is further placed at the edge of a relatively sparse area of the galactic arc we are in, seasonality, climate variability, and more, make it far less likely than was thought that any single-celled organism on any planet will face similar conditions that promote evolution over billions of years toward intelligence, able to meet the challenge of constant change without being wiped out before meeting the standards we have set. A recent study using Bayesian inference as statistical method suggests that, in fact, the odds are somewhat more against than for, as indicated by how long it took, first, to achieve multicellular life, 3 billion years on Earth, let alone sentience 5 billion, if one assumes the late Ediacarans had got that far, to abstract intelligence at least 4 billion, since other animals might well have achieved it, but not had the limbs or the need to create evidence left for us to find. Which is not to say there wasn't an E.T. Plato or Lao Tzu somewhere in the vast seas of the void and eternity, but does suggest it's not nearly so common as Star Trek or Star Wars suggest, and our chances of finding them and communicating meaningfully is pretty much nil. Story 51, that the employment situation in the USA is ever going to change. There's virtually no chance that wages will rise to meet a basic living level, or that workers' rights will ever come close to our European counterparts, or that there will ever be a thing called universal health care. There are so many financial interests that are deeply vested in continuing our horrible process of exploitation. They'll never let any of the above actually happen. The elite will use their personal propaganda machines, aka mass media, which they fully own, to sow dissent, confusion, and misinformation. Our political system is two sides of the same coin, and every single person in power is owned by a rich, or they're a rich in disguise. Our politicians, our courts, our law enforcement have long since been bought and paid for, and they ain't here to serve us. They'll salt the earth and burn the very bridges they stand on, just to show they'll never yield an inch. Story 52, election fraud, from voting in the U.S. having a measurable impact on an election. The number of cases usually number in the single digits, and a lot of the suspect cases are usually mistakes, not intentional attempts. Story 53, being born. The universe must be formed in the solar system. Then you have to make sure the Earth is actually formed, then have the meteors hit it to make water, then have land emerge, the life, then life goes on land. Then humans form, then make sure the bloodline doesn't break, and make sure your parents meet, then have them not break up and conceive you. Then finally you are born, and if we add those odds, it's a 1 in a 400 trillion. Story 54, to die in an elevator accident. It's not common at all. A lot of factors need to be lined up, and most of the time, if one factor is out of line, the elevator will automatically be out of service. You might get trapped in one for a long time, but to die is actually near impossible. Story 55, getting famous. You can even be talented. It's not a guarantee you will be famous or even making a living at whatever it is. And trying to do outrageous stuff on social media isn't a path to it either. Or worse, copying successful influencers. There's a random element of luck, timing, and chance in success and fame. And odds are it's not happening to you. The world is full of unrecognized, undiscovered genius and talent that just never found recognition. Some didn't even pursue it. There is some Office Depot manager out there who can sing like Pavarotti. There is some third world kid in a slum who can dance like Michael Jackson. Story 56, world depopulation down to 10 or less. I was hearing about this plan 30 years ago, and the theory is still very much alive today. If the people with power wanted to depopulate the world, they wouldn't need 30 or more years to accomplish a goal that was achievable in days or even hours. Story 57, not extremely low, but low, that your ex has narcissistic personality disorder. There has been a lot of hysteria about it lately, making everyone think their ex is a narcissist. Story 58, children being abducted from the bus stop. My neighbors multiple would drive their children 200 yards on a closed-loop street to the bus stop, where everyone sits in the car playing with their phones. Picks them up too. They're not 4 or 5 years old. No, they're 9 to 12. No wonder they get to college and have never had to deal with a small clash of people or ideas in their lives. Sadly, most physical abuse, neglect, and molestation happens right in the child's bedroom. What are we going to do? Outlaw bedrooms? Nah, just encourage more free playtime amongst children by themselves. Story 59, terrorism. In the 20 years between 1995 to 2015, the median number of people killed in the U.S. from terrorism was 2. 90 of terrorist deaths in that period were from 9/11, and 50 of the rest were from the Oklahoma City bombing. If you exclude those two, your chance of being killed in the U.S. by terrorist attack is about 1 in 40 million, 4x smaller than being killed in a commercial plane crash, and about 40x smaller than being struck by lightning. Story 60, I'm sure someone has mentioned, but being saved by CPR, very few people who need it get it, and it works, but boy, when it does, it is amazing. Also, if you're going to have a heart attack and need CPR, do it in a casino. Your odds are better there of getting someone trained in CPR. Story 61, shark attacks. Sharks are curious and also have horrible vision. The only way they can find out what something is with their mouth. Just like children, if they're curious about something, in the mouth it goes. They also don't like the taste of humans. Most of the time, if it somehow happens, you'll get a nom and they'll leave. Most of the time, sharks can just be nudged away, flipped, or punched if necessary, and minimal to no damages will occur. The worst thing to do in that situation would be panicking. And remember, they're crucial to the environment. Be nice to sharks. I remember a shitpost, I think, on Tumblr, saying the way to avoid this would be to give sharks arms. Arm of sharks. Story 62, solid objects can pass through each other because molecules are constantly vibrating. Like, it has never happened at a large scale, but there's a small chance of it happening. Story 63, researching AGI, artificial general idiocy intelligence. AI is pretty much a gimmick, a stochastic parrot. It has no intelligence at all. That doesn't mean that AI cannot be better than humans. There are really dumb humans out there. Story 64, literally any crime. The media loves to sensationalize stuff, but then never takes a second to take a step back and go, but we live in a country with 300 million, not a village of 200, so it's super unlikely this happens to you. Story 65, being shot with a long arm. I'm a lefty, but I also own guns, even a scary one, and the amount of neolibs that want to ban AR-15s is crazy to me. Huge chunk of gun violence is suicides, and well over 90, closer to 98, I think is handguns. No calls to ban handguns, though. Beyond that, the frequency of mass shootings varies wildly depending upon how one defines a mass shooting. Those over 600 this year numbers, or whatever, are almost entirely gang violence in inner cities. The numbers saying guns are the biggest killer of children omit infants and include 18 and 19-year-olds. All the stats are just very misleading and just another thing used to polarize the two major parties. Ada, since I made this comment, I also read that your chances of dying by fists or a hammer are significantly higher than being killed by a rifle. Dems need to drop the act, and they get a ton of independent moderate voters back. Story 66, getting audited by the IRS. Who gets audited by the IRS the most? In terms of income levels, the IRS in recent years has audited taxpayers with incomes below $25,000 and above $500,000 at higher than average rates, according to government data. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Acting IRS Commissioner Douglas O'Donnell have said that the nearly $80 billion the IRS will be receiving from the Inflation Reduction Act won't be put toward increasing audits above historical levels for taxpayers who earn less than $400,000 a year. Stephanie said the influx of funds is likely to increase the number of audits for high earners, which has fallen in recent years. Colin said that's due to the funding issues the IRS experienced. Odds of being audited by the IRS in 2022, 3. 8 out of every 1,000 returns, or 0. 38 were audited by the IRS, according to a recent report using IRS data from Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. That was down from 4, 1 out of every 1,000 returns filed, or 0, 41, the prior year. Story 67, blade drugs being in Halloween candy. It is an extremely uncommon thing for someone to do, and people act like you might find drugs in a large amount of candies. Story 68, being harmed by eating food. Food, by definition, is anything that is edible by humans. People believe things like gluten or corn are dangerous to humans when in reality, the dangers lay in high amylofibril activity. Eat whatever TF you want. Just don't be fat and give your bowels the correct proportions of fiber stuff. Story 69, a miraculous new and cheap technology to fix global warming being developed, mass-produced, and deployed at a scale large enough to make a dent in global warming within the next decades. Story 70, razor blade spins in candy. Most food is heavily regulated, including candy. Candy is actually produced by a handful of companies, with the largest being Mars and Hershey. Both companies are extremely protective of how their candy is viewed, and both will screw over a person if they find out that their product was tampered with by an individual. Between the audits done by the FDA and their own internal audits, nobody's going to be caught slipping metal pieces into candy. And if they do, they'll likely get hauled out and the entire line that was produced X that day tossed out and destroyed. And if it happens after that, it'll be so blatantly obvious that the product has been tampered with. Story 71, statistically, school shootings involving a death are rare. The average school can expect a student homicide once every 6,000 years. Children are more likely to die in their community or their homes, and schools are one of the safest places for kids. Source: a study conducted by the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. Story 72, becoming filthy rich. Ever becoming anybody like Elon? All those people the plebs admire as so-called self-made people were not in fact self-made. They all were born with platinum spoons in their mouths, and they were never going to fail no matter what. Bill Gates, born to a rich family. His mom personally knew the CEO of IBM. The rest of us could never get a meeting with the CEO like he could to ink his deal for Microsoft. Mark Zuckerberg, another rich kid like Gates who could afford to drop out of Harvard. Jeff Bezos. You think you could line up the massive amount of venture capital Amazon hemorrhage for years before they found a reasonable business model? None of these people made it because of their hard work, as much as they did from their blue-blooded contacts and connections, ones that the rest of us will never have. The rare occasion of someone who does pull themselves up is about as likely as getting struck by lightning multiple times. You're better off buying lottery tickets than thinking you're going to be like Larry Ellison. Story 73, a concept called socioeconomic mobility. The chances of you moving up, down in social strata is extremely low, but the American dream is selling you the possibility. The chances of someone making it has way less to do with how hard you work and way more to do with where you started. Story 74, WW3. Major powers do all they can to avoid conflict with one another. They prefer to fight proxy wars, and the world is to depend on one another for trade.